He had money, power, everything, except the one thing he hadn't tasted in decades: love at a family table. One simple dinner shatters the walls around his heart, and the world takes notice. But when the past is filled with lies, and powerful enemies will do anything to keep them apart, can one meal of grace rewrite a lifetime of brokenness, or will secrets tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Thunder rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Vale's penthouse, making the crystal glasses in his bar cabinet clink together. He stood at the window, watching lightning split the darkening sky over the city. His reflection showed a man who looked more worn than his 35 years, designer suit wrinkled, dark hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. The protein bar in his hand tasted like cardboard. He took another mechanical bite anyway, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. The latest acquisition numbers glowed on his tablet, but he couldn't focus on them. "Time remaining, 2 minutes," his tablet announced in its robotic voice. He'd been trying to review these reports for hours. A flash of lightning turned night to day for a split second. The thunder that followed was so loud it made him jump. Then everything went black. The sudden silence felt heavy. No more humming from the smart appliances. No gentle whir of the climate control system. Even his tablet screen had gone dark. "Hello?" he called out, feeling foolish. Of course, no one answered. He lived alone in the penthouse that took up the entire top floor. Ethan fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to navigate toward the door. He'd never actually used the emergency stairs before. That's what the private elevator was for. But he knew he should check on the building's backup systems. The stairwell was lit by dim emergency lights, casting everything in an eerie red glow. His expensive leather shoes echoed against the concrete steps as he descended. The sound bounced off the walls, making him feel even more alone. Somewhere around the 10th floor, he heard voices. Human voices. The sound was so unexpected it made him pause. "Careful with those bags, mijo," a woman's voice drifted up. "Hold the railing." "I got it, Mom," a young boy answered. "The eggs are safe." Ethan continued down, moving slower now. On the landing of the 8th floor, the service level, he saw them. A woman in a cleaning uniform was juggling several grocery bags while trying to guide a small boy who carried his own bag with exaggerated care. The woman looked up, startled by his footsteps. Recognition flickered across her face. Of course she knew who he was. Everyone in the building did, but there was something else in her expression too. A flash of concern. "Mr. Vale?" she said. "Are you all right, sir? You look a little pale." Ethan realized his hands were shaking. Whether from the cold protein bar dinner or the oppressive darkness of the stairwell, he wasn't sure. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then amended, "just checking on the building systems." "The backup generator should kick in soon," she said with quiet confidence. "But the storm might last a while." She shifted her grocery bags, and a familiar aroma wafted out, something warm and savory that made his stomach clench. The boy peered up at him with huge dark eyes. "Did the thunder scare you too? Mom says it's just angels bowling." Teo, the woman, Luz Morales, according to her name tag, said softly, but with a hint of a smile. Another crash of thunder made them all jump. The emergency lights flickered ominously. "We were just heading to our apartment," Luz said, glancing at the door to the service level. "I made extra chicken and dumplings for the church dinner tomorrow." She hesitated, then seemed to make up her mind about something. "Would you like to wait out the storm with us? It's not much, but it's warm, and there's plenty of food." Ethan started to refuse automatically. He had protocols for power outages, procedures to follow, but another roll of thunder rattled the windows, and the smell of home-cooked food made his protein bar dinner seem even more pathetic. The boy, Teo, was still watching him with those solemn eyes. "Mom's chicken and dumplings are the best. Ms. Ruby taught her the secret ingredient." Ethan cleared his throat. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Luz said firmly. She led the way through the service-level door, walking with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the hallway, even in near darkness. Their apartment was small but neat, with warm yellow walls visible in the beam of Luz's flashlight. Photos hung everywhere. Teo, at various ages, an older woman who must be Mrs. Ruby, groups of people laughing around loaded dinner tables. Rain lashed against the windows as Luz set her bags down and found some candles in a drawer. The tiny flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the modest space feel almost magical. "Please," Luz said, gesturing to a small kitchen table with mismatched chairs. "Make yourself comfortable." Ethan stood awkwardly, feeling like a giant in his expensive suit amidst the cheerful clutter of a real home. When was the last time he'd been in an actual home, not a hotel suite or corporate apartment? "Mom," Teo whispered, not very quietly, "I think Mr. Vale needs a sweater. He's shivering." Ethan hadn't even noticed, but the boy was right. The adrenaline from the power outage was wearing off, leaving him cold and slightly shaky. "I'll be fine," he started to say, but Luz was already pulling a hand-knitted sweater from a hook by the door. "Here," she said, holding it out. "It's not designer, but it's warm. Ms. Ruby made it for me last Christmas." The gesture was so simple, so kind, that Ethan found himself accepting the sweater before he could think of a reason not to. The wool was soft and smelled faintly of lavender. Another burst of lightning illuminated the apartment, followed by a crash of thunder that made the windows rattle. But somehow, in this small space with its candles and cooking smells and evidence of real life being lived, the storm seemed less threatening. "Sit," Luz said gently, like she was coaxing a nervous animal. "Let me heat up some food. We have a gas stove, thank goodness, and Teo can show you his origami while we wait." Ethan sank into one of the mismatched chairs, watching as Teo eagerly pulled colorful paper cranes from his backpack. The sweater was too big, the chair creaked slightly, and he could hear his phone buzzing with probably urgent messages in his pocket. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something like peace. Chapter 2. Chicken and Dumplings. Chapter 1. Storm in the Tower. Scene 2. The door to apartment 712 creaked open, releasing a wave of warmth and the rich aroma of home cooking. Luz flicked on a battery-powered lantern, illuminating a small but tidy living room. Family photos lined the walls, showing Teo at different ages, always smiling, always with those curious eyes. A basket of clean laundry sat half-folded on the worn brown couch, and textbooks were stacked neatly on a small desk in the corner. "Please, sit," Luz said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "The emergency lights should kick in soon, but we'll manage." Her voice was gentle but firm, like someone used to taking charge in a crisis. Ethan lowered himself into a wooden chair, feeling oddly out of place in his expensive suit. The table wobbled slightly. Someone had placed a folded paper under one leg to keep it steady. A collection of bright origami cranes decorated the windowsill, catching the occasional flash of lightning. Teo scrambled onto the chair across from Ethan, immediately pulling colored paper from his backpack. His small hands moved with surprising precision as he began folding. "We had a big lunch at the church today," Luz explained, moving efficiently around the small kitchen by lantern light. "Ms. Ruby always makes extra chicken and dumplings, says nobody should go hungry in a storm." She pulled a container from her bag and emptied it into a pot on the gas stove. The smell intensified. Herbs, butter, something that reminded Ethan of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. His stomach growled, loud enough for Teo to giggle. "Your tummy's angry," Teo observed, not looking up from his folding. "Mommy's food makes everything better." Luz stirred the pot, humming softly. The sound mixed with the patter of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. It felt surreal to Ethan, this pocket of warmth in his cold corporate world. "Do you like cranes?" Teo asked suddenly, holding up his creation. "This one's blue. Blue means truth." "It's very precise," Ethan said, studying the careful folds. "Where did you learn to make these?" "Ms. Ruby at church. She says every crane is a wish." Teo placed it carefully beside Ethan's water glass. "You can keep it." Before Ethan could respond, Luz set a bowl in front of him. Steam rose from the golden broth, chunks of tender chicken and fluffy dumplings floating enticingly. She handed him a spoon with a simple, "Careful, it's hot." Ethan stared at the bowl. When was the last time someone had served him a home-cooked meal? His kitchen at home was pristine, unused, everything delivered, everything efficient. Nothing like this. He took a careful spoonful. The flavor hit him like a wave. Rich, comforting, made with care. His throat tightened unexpectedly. "Mr. Vale?" Luz asked, concern in her voice. "Is something wrong?" Ethan tried to speak, but couldn't. To his horror, he felt tears spilling down his cheeks. He put the spoon down with a shaking hand, overwhelmed by something he couldn't name. "Oh," Luz said softly, understanding in her voice. She didn't try to touch him or offer empty comfort. Instead, she simply sat down with her own bowl, acting as if nothing unusual was happening. Teo looked between them, his small face serious. "Sometimes food makes people cry when they're hungry in their heart," he said, matter-of-factly, returning to his paper folding. "That's what Mommy says." Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed but somehow unable to stop. Each bite of the simple meal seemed to crack something open inside him, some wall he'd built so carefully over the years. The storm continued outside, but in this small kitchen, time seemed to stand still. Luz ate quietly, occasionally checking on Teo's growing collection of cranes. She didn't push conversation or demand explanations. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the clink of spoons and the soft rustle of paper. A knock at the door made them all look up. "Luz, you okay in there?" a woman's voice called. "We're fine, Mrs. Garcia," Luz answered, rising to open the door. "Just waiting out the storm." As she spoke with her neighbor about flashlight batteries and weather reports, Ethan caught a movement in the hallway. The building handyman doing his rounds with a flashlight paused briefly. There was a faint click and a glow of a phone camera before he moved on. Ethan should have felt angry at the invasion of privacy. Instead, he found himself too tired to care, too wrapped in this strange moment of peace. He took another bite of the chicken and dumplings, letting the warmth seep into his bones, aware that something fundamental had shifted in his world, but not yet understanding what. Chapter 3. Candlelight Confessions. Chapter 2. Chicken and Dumplings. Scene 2. Candlelight danced across the small kitchen table, casting warm shadows on the walls. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside Luz's apartment, time seemed to slow down. Steam rose from the bowl of chicken and dumplings in front of Ethan, who couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so comfortable. Luz moved around her kitchen with practiced ease, lighting another candle. "More?" she asked, gesturing to Ethan's nearly empty bowl with the serving spoon. "Please," he said, surprising himself. The dumplings were pillowy, soft, the chicken tender, and the broth rich with herbs he couldn't name. Each spoonful felt like medicine for something he hadn't known was ailing him. Teo sat cross-legged in his chair, meticulously folding another paper crane. His small fingers worked with surprising precision for a child his age. "Ms. Ruby taught Mommy how to make the dumplings," he announced, not looking up from his work. "She says food tastes better when you learn it from someone who loves you." Luz smiled as she filled Ethan's bowl. "Ms. Ruby's been teaching me since I started helping at the church kitchen. She's like everyone's grandmother there." "I never learned to cook," Ethan admitted, his voice quiet. "We had staff for that. My father said the kitchen wasn't a place for Vales." "But where did you have breakfast?" Teo asked, looking up with genuine confusion. "Or cookies after school?" Ethan stirred his soup, considering how to explain his childhood to a boy who clearly knew the comfort of home-cooked meals. "We ate in the dining room, or my father's office. Sometimes I had dinner alone in my room while studying." "That's sad," Teo declared with a child's direct honesty. "Our apartment always has kitchen smell. Mommy says that's how you know it's home." He set down his completed crane and started another. "Your big house has no kitchen smell?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He thought of his sterile penthouse kitchen, its gleaming appliances never used, the refrigerator stocked by his assistant with pre-made meals and protein shakes. "No," he admitted, "no kitchen smell." Luz sat down with them, her own bowl steaming. "I always wanted to go to culinary school," she shared, her eyes distant. I had such plans. Fusion cuisine combining my grandmother's recipes with classical techniques, but, she shrugged, the gesture containing years of disappointed dreams. What happened? Ethan asked softly. Life, Luz answered simply. Sometimes the path you plan isn't the one you end up walking. She smiled at Teo, who was now arranging his paper cranes in a neat row. But I still cook. Every day. It's not the fancy restaurant I dreamed of, but when I help at the church kitchen or make meals for my neighbors. She paused, searching for words. Food is love, Mr. Vale. It's community. It's how we say, you matter, without words. Thunder crashed outside, making them all jump. Teo scooted his chair closer to his mother. This is really extraordinary, Ethan said, gesturing to his bowl. I've eaten at the finest restaurants in the world, but this. He struggled to explain how this simple meal made him feel seen, cared for. That's because Mommy makes it with love, Teo explained matter-of-factly, as if this were obvious. And Ms. Ruby's secret ingredients. Luz laughed. Which aren't so secret, just patience and a little extra pepper. My mother died when I was young, Ethan found himself saying. He never talked about this, not to anyone. But something about the candlelight, the storm outside, and the warmth in this tiny apartment loosened the words. After that, meals became functional. My father viewed food as fuel, nothing more. Teo looked at him with those serious eyes. But who tucked you in, or made you soup when you were sick? Teo, Luz warned gently, but Ethan shook his head. It's okay, he said. The house staff did, I suppose. But it wasn't. He gestured around the apartment at the drawings on the refrigerator, the well-worn cookbook on the counter, the obvious signs of life and love. It wasn't like this. The lights suddenly flickered, then hummed to life. The apartment seemed different in the harsh overhead light, smaller, more worn. But the warmth remained. Ethan checked his phone, surprised to see how much time had passed. He stood reluctantly, knowing he should go. Thank you, he said, trying to put everything he felt into those 2 words. For the meal, for sharing your table. Will you come back tomorrow? Teo asked hopefully, holding out one of his paper cranes. I can teach you how to make these. And Mommy's making enchiladas. Luz started to speak, probably to say that wasn't necessary, but Ethan surprised them both, and himself, by answering first. I'd like that, he said, carefully accepting the delicate paper crane. If it's all right with your mother? Luz studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Dinner's at 6, she said. Don't be late. I won't, Ethan promised, and for the first time in years, he had something to look forward to that wasn't related to work or wealth. Something real. Chapter 4. The Pilot Light. Chapter 4. A New Beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Vale's penthouse, casting long shadows across the minimalist furniture. The space felt different today, emptier somehow. The pristine kitchen counter held nothing but his usual protein shake and laptop, but his mind kept drifting to the warmth of Luz's cramped kitchen table. He could still hear her genuine laughter when Teo had told that silly joke about astronaut food. The sound echoed in his mind, making the silence of his luxurious home feel heavier than ever. Ethan paced the length of his living room, his bare feet silent against the polished hardwood floors. The storm had long passed, but something had shifted inside him. He paused at his desk, staring at the financial reports without really seeing them. Numbers that usually commanded his full attention now seemed meaningless compared to the memory of Teo's paper cranes and Luz's home-cooked meal. He showered and dressed with unusual care, choosing a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual power suit. In the elevator down to Luz's floor, his heart raced with an unfamiliar nervousness. He'd closed billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this. The service floor corridor looked different in daylight, less mysterious but somehow more real. Children's artwork decorated the walls, and the sound of a radio drifted from somewhere down the hall. Ethan stopped at Luz's door, took a deep breath, and knocked. Mr. Vale? Luz opened the door, surprise evident in her voice. She wore a neat housekeeping uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. I wasn't expecting— Please, call me Ethan, he said quickly. May I come in? I have a proposition I'd like to discuss. Luz hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. The apartment was tidier than the night before, but still lived in and warm. Teo sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before him, another paper crane taking shape under his careful fingers. Hi, Mr. Ethan, Teo waved, his smile bright and uncomplicated. Good morning, Teo. Ethan returned the smile, feeling some of his tension ease. I have to leave for work soon, Luz said, checking her watch. The Anderson suite needs— Actually, that's part of what I wanted to discuss. Ethan pulled out one of the kitchen chairs, trying to organize his thoughts. Last night made me realize something. The meal you shared, the way you welcomed me, it showed me what's missing in my building, in my company. Luz stood by the counter, her expression cautious but interested. I'd like to offer you a position, Ethan continued. A pilot program, running meals for my employees, and expanding the church kitchen's outreach. Full creative control, your recipes, your way of bringing people together. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. The salary would more than cover your current expenses, including any overdue rent. Luz's eyes widened, but her hands remained clasped tightly in front of her. Mr. Vale, Ethan, that's very generous, but I'm not a professional chef. I never finished culinary school. You're exactly what we need, Ethan insisted, warming to his idea. Your food isn't just nutrition, it's comfort, connection. My employees eat at their desks, alone. The church kitchen struggles to serve everyone who needs it. You could change that. Teo looked up from his homework, eyes bright with hope. Like when you make meals for Ms. Ruby's veterans group, Mommy? Luz's expression softened at her son's words. She moved to the table, sitting down across from Ethan. The logistics would be complicated. I'd need help, equipment. All provided, Ethan assured her. Whatever you need. Start small, prove the concept. If it works, we expand. He slid the folder toward her. Full benefits, flexible hours, to accommodate Teo's schedule. Luz opened the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she read. Ethan watched her face, seeing the moment when hope began to overcome fear. She looked at Teo, then back at the contract. You'd give me real control? Not just following someone else's menu? Complete creative authority, Ethan confirmed. Your name, your recipes, I just want to give others what you gave me last night, a taste of home. Teo slid one of his paper cranes across the table to Ethan. For luck, he said solemnly. Luz touched the contract's pages gently, as if they might disappear. I need to think about it, to pray about it. Of course, Ethan said, standing. Take the day. The position is yours if you want it. He picked up the paper crane, carefully tucking it into his pocket. That evening, after Teo had finished his homework and gotten ready for bed, Luz knelt beside him for their nightly prayers. The contract lay signed on the kitchen table, next to a growing family of paper cranes. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, holding her son's small hands in hers. For opening doors we thought were closed forever. She reached for a sheet of origami paper, the last one from Teo's pack, and began folding it with careful fingers. Is that one for our table, Mommy? Teo asked sleepily. Yes, mi amor, Luz answered, creasing the paper with trembling fingers. For our new beginning. Chapter 5. Viral Grace. Chapter 5. The Truth Comes Out. The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains of Luz's small kitchen as she whisked eggs in a chipped ceramic bowl. The familiar rhythm of making breakfast felt steadying after yesterday's whirlwind deal with Ethan. Teo sat at their tiny table, his legs swinging as he played with her phone. Mommy, you're famous! Teo's eyes widened as he scrolled. Look at all these people talking about you and Mr. Vale. Luz wiped her hands on her apron and peered over his shoulder. Her heart skipped a beat. There on the screen was a slightly grainy photo of Ethan Vale, Billionaire tech CEO, with tears streaming down his face as he sat at her humble kitchen table. The timestamp showed it was from 2 nights ago during the storm. Below the image, comments and shares multiplied by the second. First real meal is trending, Teo announced proudly. though Luz could tell he didn't quite understand what that meant. Her hands trembled as she took the phone. Thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of likes. Some comments were touching. This is what real food and kindness can do. Others made her stomach clench. Who is this mystery woman who made a billionaire cry? A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the peephole, Luz saw a cluster of reporters, cameras at the ready. She backed away, heart racing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "I'm so sorry about this. Security is on the way. Don't open the door." More knocking. "Ms. Morales, can you comment on the viral photo? What did you serve, Mr. Vale?" Teo clutched her arm. "Mommy, I'm scared." She pulled him close. "It's okay, Myho. They're just curious people who forgot their manners." The eggs sat forgotten on the counter as camera flashes leaked under the door. Her phone rang Ethan again. "I'm dealing with this right now," he said when she answered. "My board is meeting, but I'm coming over. Just stay inside." Across town in the Vale Technologies boardroom, Cecilia Rhodes stood at the head of the table, her manicured nails tapping an angry rhythm on the polished wood. "This is a PR nightmare waiting to explode," she said, pointing to the viral photo projected on the wall. "A billionaire CEO crying over some housekeeper's cooking? The markets will see weakness. We need to shut this down now." Ethan sat quietly, his jaw set. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. "I've drafted a statement," Cecilia continued. "We'll say it was a private moment taken out of context, request privacy, and—" "No?" Ethan's voice was soft but firm. "Excuse me?" He stood, straightening his jacket. "I said no. I'm not hiding this." He pulled out his phone and began typing. "Ethan, don't you dare!" But he was already pressing send. On every Vale Technologies social media account, his message appeared. "Yes, I cried over Luz Morales' cooking, because sometimes the simplest acts of kindness break down our walls. I'm proud to announce Vale Tech's new partnership with her and the First Street Church Kitchen, bringing dignity and good food to our community." Cecilia's face reddened. "You can't." "I just did." He headed for the door. "And I'm matching all community donations to the church kitchen, dollar for dollar." He paused in the doorway. "Sometimes, Cecilia, being human is good business." An hour later, Ethan's security team had cleared the reporters from Luz's hallway. She opened the door cautiously to find him standing there, looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry about all this," he said, stepping inside, "but I think we turned it around. The donation matching is already at 6 figures. Luz sagged against the wall in relief. "I just hope this dies down soon." Teo was scared. "I wasn't scared," Teo protested from behind her. "I just didn't like the flashy lights." Ethan knelt down to the boy's level. "You were very brave, buddy. How about we make some of those paper cranes while your mom finishes breakfast?" Teo nodded eagerly, but then paused. He tugged at Ethan's sleeve, his small face suddenly serious. The boy's next whispered words made the room go still. "Mommy says you're my daddy." Chapter 6. The Whisper. Teo's innocent words hung in the air like suspended lightning. "Mommy says you're my daddy." Ethan's hand froze on the doorknob, his knuckles turning white. The bustling sounds of the hallway faded to a distant hum as blood rushed in his ears. He turned slowly, his face drained of color, to find Luz standing perfectly still, one hand pressed against the kitchen counter for support. "Teo, mi amor," Luz's voice wavered. "Why don't you go finish your homework? I need to talk to Mr. Vale." "But Mom," Teo started to protest. "Now please," Luz said firmly, though her hands trembled as she smoothed her apron. Teo gathered his backpack, his small shoulders slumping as he shuffled to his room. The soft click of his bedroom door echoed in the thick silence. Ethan remained rooted in place, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Is what he said? The words stuck in his throat. "Please," Luz whispered, gesturing to the kitchen table, the same table where everything had started with a simple bowl of chicken and dumplings. "Sit down." They sat across from each other, the distance between them suddenly vast despite the table's small size. Outside, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. A paper crane, one of Teo's creations, cast a delicate shadow on the tablecloth. "I should have told you sooner," Luz began, her fingers tracing the pattern on her coffee mug. "When all this started, the meal program, the publicity, I knew eventually." "We've met before," Ethan said slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "University of Texas, junior year." Luz nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "The tamale stand my abuela ran near campus. You used to stop by every Thursday." "Your grandmother's green chile sauce," Ethan whispered, the memory rushing back. "You were studying business and culinary arts." "We dated for 4 months," Luz continued, her voice growing stronger. "Until that letter arrived." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What letter?" Luz stood and walked to a small desk in the corner. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a weathered envelope, handling it like it might crumble. She passed it to Ethan, with shaking hands. As he read, his face darkened. The letter, supposedly from him, coldly ended their relationship and warned her to stay away. "I never wrote this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Luz, I would never—" "I know that now," she said quietly. "But then, I was 19, scared, and suddenly my scholarship was gone. The financial aid office said there had been a review. I couldn't prove anything, but the timing. My father," Ethan growled, crumpling the letter in his fist. "This reads exactly like him. A week later, I found out I was pregnant." Luz wiped a tear from her cheek. "I tried to find you, but you'd transferred to MIT. Your father's office made it clear that any attempts to contact you would result in legal action." Ethan pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair. 8 years, he muttered. "I have a son. I've had a son for 8 years and never knew." "I wanted to tell you when we met again," Luz said. "But how do you drop something like that? Thanks for the job offer, by the way. That's your son folding paper cranes at my table?" A small noise from the hallway made them both turn. Teo stood there in his Pokemon pajamas, clutching his latest origami creation. "Are you mad?" he asked in a small voice. Ethan looked at the boy, really looked at him, and saw his own eyes staring back. The same serious expression he'd seen in childhood photos of himself. The same way of tilting his head when puzzling something out. "No, Teo," Ethan said softly. "I'm not mad, I'm just surprised. And sad that I missed so much." "Mom keeps a photo album," Teo offered hopefully. "With all my school pictures and stuff." Luz moved to usher Teo back to bed, but Ethan held up a hand. "I'd like to see it," he said, "if that's okay." For the next hour, they sat on Luz's worn couch, Teo between them, flipping through pages of a life Ethan had never known existed. First steps. First day of kindergarten. Baseball games and science fairs. "It's late," Luz finally said, noticing Teo's eyes growing heavy. "We all need some sleep." After Teo was tucked in, Ethan stood at the apartment door, his world completely upended. "I'll need to verify. There are legal considerations." "I understand," Luz said. "We can do whatever tests you need." Ethan nodded, unable to form more words. He walked to his car in a daze, barely noticing the light rain that had begun to fall. Inside the quiet cocoon of his luxury sedan, he sat motionless, watching drops gather on the windshield. "Mommy says you're my daddy," he whispered into the darkness, tasting the weight of each word. A father. He was a father. Chapter 7. Chain of Custody. Chapter 6. The Whisper. Scene 2. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Pastor Joe's office, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden floor. The small space felt even smaller with the heavy silence hanging between Ethan and Luz, who sat in mismatched chairs before the pastor's desk. Pastor Joe folded his hands and leaned forward, his gentle eyes moving between them. "I understand. This is complicated," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But we're here to find a path forward that protects everyone, especially Teo." Ethan's shoulders were rigid beneath his expensive suit. He hadn't slept, dark circles shadowing his eyes. His usual confidence had crumbled, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "I want a DNA test," he said, then quickly added. "Not because I doubt you, Luz, but because we need to do this right." Luz nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore her work uniform. She'd taken the morning off from her housekeeping duties, but would need to return soon. "I understand, and I agree. We'll need chain of custody documentation," Ethan continued, slipping into the familiar territory of logistics. "Everything properly tracked and witnessed. No room for questions or—" He trailed off, thinking of his board, of Cecilia's shrewd eyes. "The hospital where I volunteer has a reputable lab," Pastor Joe offered. "They handle legal cases. I can make some calls." "Thank you," Luz said softly. She turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time that morning. "But, Ethan, I need to know, what are your intentions with Teo?" The question hung heavy in the air. Ethan leaned forward, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I want to take this slowly, very slowly. He's such a bright kid, and if he's—" Ethan's voice caught. "If he's my son, I don't want to rush in and disrupt his whole world. He needs stability." Relief softened Luz's features. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear," Pastor Joe smiled warmly. "Slow steps are wise. Teo's heart is at stake here." "He's already started asking questions," Luz admitted. "About his father, about why Mr. Vale keeps coming around." She twisted her hands together. "I've never lied to him, but I've been careful with the truth." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "What do we tell him while we wait for the results?" "The truth," Pastor Joe suggested, "just simplified. That you and his mother knew each other long ago, and you're getting to know each other again. That you care about him and want to spend time with him, but grown-up things are complicated sometimes." "I can work with that," Luz said. She glanced at her watch and stood. "I should get back to work. My supervisor's been understanding, but—" "I'll have my office call about scheduling the test," Ethan said, rising as well. "And Luz, thank you for being willing to do this the right way." Pastor Joe walked them to his office door. "Remember," he said, "whatever the results, God has a purpose in bringing you all together. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most unexpected seeds." Later that evening, Ethan found himself back at Luz's apartment, this time invited properly for dinner. The small table was set with mismatched plates, and the apartment smelled of beans and rice. Teo sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by colorful paper squares. "Mr. Vale," Teo's face lit up. "Want to see my new crane? I made it special today." Ethan knelt beside him, careful not to wrinkle his suit pants. "I'd love to." Teo held up a perfectly folded crane made from paper that shifted between blue and green. "See? The paper changes colors, like magic." He pressed it into Ethan's hand. "This one's for family." Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as they closed around the delicate paper bird. He looked up to find Luz watching from the kitchen, her eyes soft with understanding. The crane felt impossibly light in his palm, but somehow it carried the weight of all their hopes. "Thank you, Teo," Ethan managed, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll keep it safe." Chapter 8. Table for All. Chapter 8. The First Table. Steam rose from bubbling pots as Luz stirred a massive pot of vegetable soup, her wooden spoon moving in slow, practiced circles. The church kitchen hummed with activity, volunteers chopping carrots, measuring spices, and kneading dough for fresh rolls. The familiar scent of garlic and herbs filled the air, making the industrial space feel more like home. Ethan stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, methodically washing dishes. His expensive watch sat safely in his pocket, replaced by a simple digital timer. He'd been quiet all morning, letting the rhythm of scrubbing and rinsing calm his nerves. "You missed a spot," Ms. Ruby called out, peering over his shoulder. She adjusted her reading glasses and pointed to a pot with stubborn burned bits. "Here, let it soak in hot water first. Even billionaires need to learn the basics." Ethan's cheeks flushed, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He'd learned quickly that Ms. Ruby's sharp tongue came with an equally sharp eye for detail and a heart of gold. Luz couldn't help but smile as she watched them. Ms. Ruby had taken charge of the Table for All pilot program like a general organizing troops, but her battlefield was hospitality. She'd arranged the dining room with mixed tables, some high, some low, some round, some square, so everyone would find a comfortable spot. 10 minutes, until the first guests arrive, Ms. Ruby announced, clapping her hands. Teo, honey, are those napkins folded? Teo looked up from his station, where he'd been carefully arranging paper napkins into triangles. Almost done, Ms. Ruby. He beamed with pride, taking his job seriously. The first guests trickled in hesitantly, a mix of Ethan's employees and local seniors. They stood awkwardly at first, unsure where to sit or how to act. A young programmer in a hoodie shuffled his feet near the door. An elderly woman with a walker inched forward, eyeing the room. Ms. Ruby swooped in like a warm breeze. Martha, come sit right here by the window, the light's perfect for your knitting. She guided the elderly woman to a corner table. And you, young man? Yes, you in the hoodie. Why don't you join her? Martha makes the best sock monkeys this side of the Mississippi. Slowly, the room began to fill. The programmer Kevin helped Martha set up her walker. She pulled out her knitting and started showing him how to cast on stitches. At another table, a retired veteran shared stories with two wide-eyed interns. Luz ladled soup into bowls, adding an extra spoonful of vegetables for those who looked particularly hungry. Each serving came with a warm smile and often a gentle question. How's your mother doing? Or, did your daughter have her baby yet? The sound of spoons clinking against bowls mingled with growing conversation. Someone laughed a real, genuine laugh, and others joined in. The tension in the room melted like butter on warm bread. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The corporate cafeteria had never felt like this. There, people ate quickly at their desks or huddled in closed groups, talking business. Here, strangers were becoming neighbors over bowls of soup. Here, Luz said softly, handing him a bowl. You need to eat too. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and neither pulled away too quickly. He sat at the end of a long table, where Teo was showing an elderly man how to fold a paper crane. The man's arthritic fingers moved slowly, but Teo was patient, demonstrating each fold twice. Like this, Mr. Johnson, Teo explained. See? The wings go up like it's about to fly. Ethan tasted the soup. It was simple, clear broth, tender vegetables, herbs he couldn't name, but something about it made his chest tight. He watched as Miss Ruby patted shoulders and topped off water glasses, as Martha taught Kevin to pearl stitch, as Luz moved through the room like she was hosting family. A young woman from accounting raised her hand shyly. Ms. Morales, could I get your recipe? My grandmother would love this soup. Luz's eyes crinkled with pleasure. Of course. Come by the kitchen later, I'll write it down for you. The meal stretched on, unhurried. When bowls were empty, people lingered, trading stories and phone numbers. Martha promised to teach Kevin more stitches next week. The veteran arranged to speak at the interns' community service club. Ethan stayed at his table, soaking it in. All his life, meals had been transactions, business meetings, charity galas, lonely takeout in his office. But this was different. This was breaking bread together, sharing more than just food. Luz appeared beside him, ladle in hand. Would you like more soup? He looked up at her, really looked at her flower on her cheek, wisps of hair escaping her bun, eyes bright with joy. She was in her element here, creating not just meals but connections, his chest filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the soup. Yes, he said simply. Please. She filled his bowl, and her smile, that real, unguarded smile, made him feel, for the first time in decades, like he truly belonged at a table. The middle. Chapter 9. Porch. Light. Almost. Chapter 8. Table for All. Scene 2. Fireflies danced in the warm evening air as Ethan walked beside Luz and Teo, their footsteps echoing softly on the quiet sidewalk. The pilot dinner had been a resounding success, 30 people from all walks of life sharing meals and stories around tables decorated with Teo's paper cranes. Now, with the dishes cleaned and leftovers packed away, a peaceful contentment settled over them. Teo skipped ahead, chasing the glowing insects with gentle hands. His small voice carried back to them, counting each flash of light. 7, 8, 9. "Careful not to go too far," Luz called out, smiling as she watched her son. Her dark hair caught the golden streetlight, and she'd loosened her neat bun, letting a few strands fall around her face. She still wore her white apron, now spotted with traces of the evening's cooking. "He's got so much energy," Ethan said, his hands in his pockets. He'd abandoned his usual suit jacket hours ago, and his crisp white shirt had wrinkles from dish duty. "Even after all that running around in the kitchen, he's running on pure excitement," Luz replied. "He told everyone who would listen that he was the official taste tester. Well, he took his duties very seriously. I saw him sample at least 3 bowls of soup." They shared a quiet laugh, and Ethan found himself walking closer to her, their shoulders nearly touching. The evening felt different, somehow softer, full of possibility. "Thank you," Luz said suddenly, her voice low. "For believing in this, in me." "I should be thanking you," Ethan responded. "You've shown me what I've been missing all these years. Community, real food, a place to belong." They reached Luz's front porch, where potted herbs lined the steps: basil, oregano, and mint, releasing their fragrance in the night air. Teo had tired himself out chasing fireflies and now trudged up the steps, yawning widely. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I want to make more cranes for the tables." "We'll see, Maijo," Luz said, ruffling his hair. "Why don't you go get ready for bed? I'll be there in a minute." Teo nodded sleepily and gave Ethan a surprise hug around the waist before heading inside. The screen door creaked shut behind him, leaving Luz and Ethan alone on the porch. The crickets chirped softly in the darkness, and more fireflies blinked in the small front yard. Ethan turned to face Luz, his heart beating faster as their eyes met. "I've never seen anything like tonight," he said quietly. "The way everyone came together. Your food didn't just feed their bodies, it fed their souls." Luz stepped closer, her eyes bright in the dim light. "That's what good food does. It brings people together, makes them forget their differences." "Is that what you dreamed of? In culinary school?" "Something like this," she whispered. "A place where everyone feels welcome, where food tells stories and builds bridges." Ethan reached out slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered near her cheek, and Luz didn't pull away. The air between them felt charged with unspoken words and possibilities. They moved closer, drawn together like the fireflies dancing in the darkness. Ethan could smell the lingering scent of herbs and spices on her skin, could see the slight flush in her cheeks. His hand cupped her face gently, and Luz's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned in. "Mommy!" Teo's voice called from inside, followed by an enormous yawn. "I can't find my pajamas." They jumped apart, startled by the interruption. For a moment they just looked at each other, then both burst into quiet laughter, the tension breaking like a summer storm. "Duty calls," Luz said, smoothing her apron with slightly shaky hands. "Of course," Ethan replied, taking a step back. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his racing heart. "I should get going anyway. Early meeting tomorrow." Luz reached for the porch light switch, pausing with her hand on the wall. "Drive safely," she said softly. "I will." Ethan walked backward down the steps, not wanting to look away just yet. "See you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," she confirmed with a small smile. As Ethan reached his car, Luz flipped the switch. Warm yellow light flooded the porch, casting long shadows across the yard. He watched in his rearview mirror as she disappeared inside, then sat for a moment, one hand pressed against his thundering heart. The night air still held the warmth of possibility, and somewhere in the darkness, the fireflies continued their dance. Chapter 10. The Letter That Never Reached Him. Chapter 10. A Ghost from the Files. Scene 1. Dust motes danced in the beam of Mina Park's flashlight as she moved through the Vale Foundation's archive room. Metal shelving stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with decades of corporate history. The young journalist adjusted her glasses, checking the index card in her hand against the row numbers. "Section G. 7, she muttered, running her finger along the spines of old binders. "Graham Vale's personal correspondence, 2003, 2005. The box she needed sat on a high shelf, gathering dust. Mina dragged over a stepladder, careful not to make noise, even though she had permission to be here. Something about old archives always made her want to whisper. She lifted the heavy cardboard box and carried it to a nearby table, where her laptop cast a blue glow in the dim room. The lid came off with a soft puff of dust, revealing neat rows of manila folders. "Come on, show me your secrets," Mina whispered, pulling on cotton archival gloves. She'd been tracking the story of Ethan Vale and Luz Morales for weeks now, ever since that viral photo of the billionaire crying over chicken and dumplings. But something about the timing of Luz's departure from college nagged at her investigative instincts. The first few folders contained nothing unusual: charitable donation receipts, board meeting minutes, Christmas card lists. Mina's shoulders tensed as the hours ticked by. She was running out of time before the building closed. Then she saw a thick envelope marked "Private Confidential," tucked between two routine files. The paper was expensive, watermarked with the old Vale Industries logo. Her heart beat faster as she carefully worked open the sealed flap. Inside was a letter, dated 15 years ago. The letterhead belonged to Graham Vale himself. Mina's eyes widened as she began to read. "Dear Dean Richardson, I trust this letter finds you well. As discussed in our meeting, I am following up regarding the scholarship status of Ms. Luz Morales." Mina's hands shook. The letter detailed exactly how Graham Vale had leveraged his influence and foundation donations to pressure the university into revoking Luz's scholarship. He'd even enclosed a copy of a forged breakup letter, typed to look like it came from Ethan. "My son's future cannot be derailed by this unfortunate situation," Graham had written. "I trust you understand the delicacy required. The Foundation's continued support of the university depends on your discretion in this matter." Mina sat back in her chair, stunned. Here was proof that Graham Vale had deliberately separated Ethan and Luz, using his money and power to force her out of school. He'd even faked a letter to make Luz believe Ethan had abandoned her. She spread the documents across the table: the original letter, the forgery, bank transfers showing compensatory payments to key administrators. Graham Vale had orchestrated the whole thing, and he'd documented it all with cold precision. "Oh my God," Mina whispered, snapping photos with her phone. This was bigger than she'd imagined. The story would expose decades of corporate corruption and abuse of power. It would vindicate Luz and explain why she'd never told Ethan about their child. But it would also destroy the reputation of one of the city's most powerful institutions. The Vale Foundation funded hospitals, schools, research centers. How many people would lose their jobs when this scandal broke? How many charitable programs would collapse? Mina rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the truth in her hands. As a journalist, she'd built her career on exposing corruption and fighting for justice. But she'd never held something this explosive before. She looked again at Graham's signature, bold and arrogant, at the bottom of the letter. He'd been so certain of his power that he'd kept evidence of his own wrongdoing. Maybe he'd wanted someone to find it someday, to understand why he'd done what he'd done. The archive room's motion sensor lights clicked off, leaving Mina in the glow of her laptop. She had to make a decision. The truth about Graham Vale's manipulation would change lives, some for better, some for worse. She thought of Luz, working double shifts to support her son. She thought of Ethan, alone in his tower, until a plate of chicken and dumplings broke through his walls. They deserved to know the truth about what had torn them apart. With careful movements, Mina slid the letters and documents into a manila folder. The weight of it felt heavy in her hands, like it contained more than just paper. "The truth has to come out," she whispered, closing the archive box. Chapter 11. Smoke from the Kitchen. Chapter 11. Rising Tension. Scene 1. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vale Technologies' cafeteria, warming the newly renovated space. Luz moved confidently between the serving stations, adjusting heat lamps and checking temperatures. The aroma of fresh herbs and simmering stews filled the air, replacing the sterile scent of pre-packaged meals. "Miss Luz, can I have seconds?" A young programmer held out his empty bowl, his eyes hopeful. "Your pozole reminds me of my abuela's." Luz's face brightened as she ladled more of the fragrant soup. "Of course, Miguel, there's plenty for everyone." At a nearby table, Ms. Ruby supervised the volunteer servers, mostly seniors from the church who'd become regulars at the Table for All program. Her commanding presence kept the lunch rush flowing smoothly, even as the line stretched toward the door. "Straighten that ladle, Sarah," Ruby called out. "We're feeding souls here, not running a mess hall." Teo darted between tables in his mini apron, delivering napkins and sharing stories about his paper cranes. Employees ruffled his hair and slipped him extra cookies, charmed by his enthusiasm. "Look, Mom!" Teo held up his phone, beaming. "The food blog gave us 5 stars!" Luz was about to respond when she noticed several employees hunched over their phones, their expressions darkening. Whispers rippled through the cafeteria. One woman quickly closed her laptop, avoiding Luz's eyes. Ms. Ruby's phone buzzed. Her face hardened as she read the screen. "Luz, honey, come here a minute." In the kitchen, Ms. Ruby showed Luz her phone. A sleek website displayed professional photos of Luz and Ethan from various angles, all taken without their knowledge. The headline blazed, "Gold Digger Alert, the truth behind Veil, Tech's Feel Good Story." Luz's hands trembled as she scrolled. Comments flooded the article. "Send her back where she came from. Just another immigrant trying to trap a rich man. Bet that kid isn't even his." More photos appeared. Luz entering her apartment building late at night. Teo at school. Even old pictures from her college days. Each one carried cruel captions questioning her character and motives. "There's more," Ms. Ruby said grimly, showing her social media feeds where paid trolls were spreading the story like wildfire. "They're calling you terrible things, child." Luz's throat tightened. She recognized Cecilia Rhodes' careful hand in this. The polished presentation, the strategic timing, the way it played on people's worst prejudices while maintaining plausible deniability. "My baby," Luz whispered, thinking of Teo. "They have pictures of my baby." Ms. Ruby wrapped her arms around Luz as she began to shake. "Let it out, honey. I've got you." "I never wanted any of this," Luz sobbed into Ms. Ruby's shoulder. "I just wanted to cook, to make people happy, to give Teo a good life. Why are they so cruel?" The kitchen door burst open. Ethan stood there, his face ashen, phone clutched in his hand. "I just saw. Luz, I'm so sorry. I'll have legal shut this down immediately." "The damage is already done," Ms. Ruby said sharply. "These vultures have been planning this for weeks." Ethan moved closer, reaching for Luz. "I'll protect you both. I'll hire security, release statements, whatever it takes." Luz lifted her tear-stained face from Ms. Ruby's shoulder. Her eyes met Ethan's, carrying years of hard-learned wisdom about power and privilege. "Can you really?" she asked softly. "Can you protect us from all the hate in their hearts?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything money couldn't fix. Miguel poked his head into the kitchen. "Ms. Luz, people are asking about lunch." "I'll handle it," Ms. Ruby said firmly, straightening her spine. "You two sort this out." She marched into the cafeteria, voice ringing with authority. "All right, folks, phones away. If you're here to eat, eat. If you're here to gossip, the door's right there." Luz wiped her eyes, struggling to find her composure. Her whole world, the program she'd built, her son's privacy, her own dignity, felt like it was crumbling under the weight of Cecilia's calculated cruelty. She looked at Ethan again, this time with haunted eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness. "Can you really protect us?" Chapter 12. A Pledge with Both Hands. Chapter 12. The Gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. Hundreds of San Francisco's elite mingled beneath soaring ceilings, their evening wear sparkling as cameras flashed. The annual Veil Technologies Philanthropy Gala had always been a highlight of the social calendar, but tonight felt different. There was electricity in the air. Luz stood near one of the ornate pillars, feeling both out of place and strangely at home. The midnight blue dress she'd borrowed from Miss Ruby's daughter fit perfectly, though she kept resisting the urge to smooth its silken folds. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, exposing the simple pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. "You look beautiful, mija," Ms. Ruby had whispered earlier, helping with the final touches. "Like you were born for this." Now watching the crowd, Luz caught snippets of conversation about the Table for All pilot program. To her surprise, many spoke warmly of how it had transformed the company culture. Even some board members, who'd initially opposed the initiative, were praising its success. Ethan appeared at her side, handsome in his tuxedo, but with that familiar, awkward energy she'd come to cherish. "Ready?" he asked softly. "For what?" Luz tried to keep her voice steady. "Trust me." He smiled, then made his way to the stage where a microphone stood waiting. The room gradually quieted as Ethan took his position. Luz noticed Cecilia, the board chair, watching from a corner with narrowed eyes. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. For years, Vail Technologies has prided itself on innovation, on disrupting old systems, on changing the world through technology. He paused, scanning the crowd. But sometimes, the most powerful innovations aren't about algorithms or artificial intelligence. Sometimes, they're about remembering what makes us human. A murmur rippled through the audience. Luz felt her heart beating faster. 3 months ago, during a power outage, I experienced my first home-cooked meal in years. It wasn't at a 5-star restaurant. It wasn't prepared by a private chef. It was made by someone who understood that food is about more than nutrition. It's about connection, about dignity, about creating space where people can truly see each other. His eyes found Luz's across the room. That meal changed everything. And the person who prepared it, Luz Morales, helped me understand what real innovation looks like. It looks like veterans sharing stories with college interns over soup, like executives and janitors breaking bread as equals, like lonely people finding family around a table. Cameras flashed more intensely now. Luz felt tears threatening but held them back. "Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Table for All Foundation, with an initial endowment of $50 million. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. This foundation will fund community kitchens nationwide, partnering with local organizations to create spaces where dignity is served alongside dinner, where artificial barriers of class and status dissolve over real food and real conversation." Several board members were now standing, their faces taut with barely contained anger. Cecilia made a slashing motion across her throat. Ethan continued as if he hadn't noticed. "And I'm honored to announce that Luz Morales will serve as the Foundation's executive director. Her vision, her heart, and her understanding of food's power to heal and unite make her the perfect person to lead this initiative." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous level. Luz felt Ms. Ruby's hand squeeze her shoulder in support as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "This is just phase 1, Ethan continued, his voice strong and clear. "We plan to open 50 kitchens in the first year alone. Because everyone deserves a place at the table. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to feel at home." The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. Even some board members, caught up in the moment, rose to their feet. Cecilia stormed out a side door, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. As the applause continued, Ethan made his way through the crowd to where Luz stood. The string quartet began to play, and couples moved toward the dance floor. He reached for her hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Dance with me?" he asked. Luz nodded, unable to speak. They moved onto the dance floor as the music swelled. Other couples swirled around them, but Luz barely noticed. Ethan's hands were warm and steady as they held hers. "I should have told you what I was planning," he whispered. "I might have tried to talk you out of it," she admitted with a small laugh. "That's exactly why I didn't." His smile was tender. "The board will be furious, but I don't care. This is right. This is what matters." They turned slowly under the sparkling chandeliers. Luz could feel the eyes on them, hear the whispers and the camera clicks. But for once, she didn't feel exposed or vulnerable. She felt strong, sure. Ethan drew her slightly closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This is just the beginning." Chapter 13. The Cut. Chapter 13. The fall. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Ethan's penthouse office, but it brought no warmth. His fingers trembled as he opened the email from GeneTech Labs, marked, "Urgent, confidential results." The message was brief, clinical, devastating. Based on comparative DNA analysis, we must conclude that Ethan Vale is not the biological father of Mateo Morales. Confidence level, 99.9%. Ethan read the words again and again, willing them to change. His coffee grew cold beside his keyboard as his world tilted sideways. Just yesterday, he'd held Luz in his arms under the chandeliers, certain of their future. Now, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Notifications flooded in, media alerts, text messages, emails. With a growing sense of dread, he opened the first link. The headline screamed across his screen. Gold. Digger's scheme. Exposed. Housekeeping staff tried to con billionaire. Below it were private photos. Luz entering his building late at night. Tio hugging him in the cafeteria, the viral photo of him crying over chicken and dumplings, all twisted into something ugly and false. The article, clearly orchestrated by Cecilia, painted Luz as a calculating manipulator who had manufactured the entire relationship for financial gain. It quoted anonymous sources, claiming she had targeted other wealthy men in the past. Each word was carefully crafted to destroy while avoiding outright libel. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He tried calling Luz, but it went straight to voicemail. His next call was to his lawyers, demanding immediate action, but he knew the damage was already spreading like wildfire. Across town, in her small apartment, Luz sat at her kitchen table, staring at her own copy of the lab results. Her phone had been ringing non-stop until she finally turned it off. The morning news played quietly on the TV in the background, where talking heads were already dissecting every aspect of her life. Questions about the timing of these revelations, coming just hours after Vale's announcement of a multi-million-dollar foundation. Sources suggest a pattern of similar behavior. The board of Vale Technologies, calling an emergency meeting. Luz's hands shook as she picked up her mug of tea, spilling a few drops onto the manila envelope containing the test results. How could this be possible? She remembered that spring night in college so clearly. There had been no one else, ever. The genetic test had to be wrong. But who would believe her now? A soft sound made her look up. Teo stood in the doorway of his bedroom, still in his pajamas, clutching his latest paper crane. His dark eyes were wide with confusion and hurt. "Mommy? Why are they saying mean things about us on TV?" Luz opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. How could she explain this to her son? How could she protect him from the cruel machinery that had been set in motion? The apartment buzzer sounded, making them both jump. Through the security camera feed, Luz could see reporters gathering in the building's lobby. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Ms. Prufin. "Ruby. Don't answer the door. We're coming to get you." Teo moved closer to the TV, where a photo of Ethan was now displayed. "But he is my daddy. You said so." His voice quavered. "You said we were going to be a family. Baby, it's complicated." Luz started, reaching for him. The buzzer sounded again, more insistent this time. On the TV, a reporter was interviewing Cecilia Rhodes outside Vale Technologies headquarters. "As board chair, I have a responsibility to protect this company from those who would exploit it," Cecilia was saying, her voice dripping with false concern. The timing of Ms. Morales' claims, followed by this generous foundation announcement, raises serious questions about. Luz grabbed the remote and turned off the TV, but it was too late. Teo had heard enough. His bottom lip trembled as he looked at his mother. "You said he was my daddy," he repeated, louder this time. "You promised." "Teo, please, let me explain." But Teo wasn't listening anymore. He ran to his room, emerging moments later with his backpack, the one covered in superhero patches that he'd been so proud to show Ethan just days ago. Luz could see it was stuffed with paper cranes, the ones they'd been folding together during quiet evenings at the kitchen table. "Teo, where are you going?" "Stop." But her son was already running for the door. In her rush to catch him, Luz knocked over a chair. The moment's delay was all Teo needed. He yanked open the apartment door and bolted down the hallway toward the stairs. "Mateo, come back!" Luz chased after him, her heart pounding. She could hear his footsteps echoing in the stairwell, heading down. By the time she reached the ground floor, the lobby was chaos. Reporters surging forward, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Through the glass doors, she caught a glimpse of Teo's red backpack as he darted past the crowd and into the rain. "Teo!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the storm of questions and camera clicks. "Miss Morales, how long have you been planning this scheme? What do you say to accusations that you targeted Mr. Vale? Was this all about the money?" Luz pushed through them, desperate to follow her son, but hands grabbed at her arms, microphones thrust in her face. Through the rain-streaked windows, she watched helplessly, as Teo's small figure disappeared around the corner, paper cranes spilling from his unzipped backpack like wounded birds in the rain. Chapter 14. Backpacks. Beacons. Chapter 14. Rock Bottom. Scene 1. Thunder cracked overhead as Luz's scream pierced the night. "Teo! Teo!" Her voice echoed through the empty streets, raw with desperation. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking through her thin jacket as she ran from corner to corner, calling his name. Inside the church basement, Pastor Joe quickly organized the gathering crowd into search teams. "Misso." Ruby stood at his side, her usually cheerful face stern with worry, as she handed out flashlights and walkie-talkies to the volunteers. "Remember, he's wearing a blue backpack with paper cranes," Ruby announced, her voice carrying over the rumble of thunder. 10 years old, green dinosaur t-shirt, brown sneakers. Ethan burst through the church doors, rainwater dripping from his expensive suit. His face was ashen, tie loosened, and hair disheveled. Gone was the polished CEO. In his place stood a father terrified for his son. "I've called off the board meeting," he said, voice hoarse. "What do you need me to do?" Pastor Joe placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Join Team 3. They're covering the park and community center." Ms. Ruby efficiently divided the growing group of neighbors and local veterans into sections. Old Mr. Martinez, who had served 3 tours in Vietnam, took charge of the northern grid. Sarah from the coffee shop coordinated with police on her phone. Even Mrs. Chen from the laundromat came out despite her bad hip, clutching a thermos of hot tea for the searchers. Hour after hour passed. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across empty playgrounds and down rain-slicked alleys. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves brought fresh hope and fresh disappointment. Ethan refused to stay in his car or take shelter. He trudged through puddles, calling Teo's name until his voice grew hoarse. His Italian leather shoes were ruined, his suit caked with mud, but he didn't care. With each passing minute, the weight of guilt pressed heavier on his chest. "This is my fault," he muttered, scanning another empty alley. "I should have protected them both." A veteran named Dave fell into step beside him. "Kids are resilient," he said quietly. "We'll find him." Lightning flashed, illuminating Luz across the street. She stood frozen on a corner, rain streaming down her face, looking lost and small. Ethan started toward her, but Miss Ruby got there first, wrapping her in a fierce hug. "My baby," Luz whispered. "He's out there. Alone. In this storm." "Not alone," Ms. Ruby corrected firmly. "He's got all of us looking for him. Now come on, child. We've got more ground to cover." The search expanded. Veterans who knew the area's hiding spots led teams through back lots and abandoned buildings. Neighbors opened their garages and basements. Someone set up a command center in the church hall with hot coffee and dry towels. Past midnight, the storm reached its peak. Wind whipped between buildings, turning umbrellas inside out. Thunder rolled continuously overhead. Ethan's feet were numb, his clothes completely soaked, but he kept moving. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Teo's face, bright, trusting, calling him Dad, and his chest ached with a pain deeper than any business loss. Pastor Joe's voice crackled over the walkie-talkies. "Team 4, check the riverside. Team 2, double back to the school." The hours blurred together. 1:30, 2, 2:30. Each minute stretched like an eternity. Ethan found himself praying for the first time since childhood, desperate whispers carried away by the wind. At 3 a.m, a shout cut through the storm. "Over here!" It was one of the veterans, waving his flashlight from the church steps. "I found something." Everyone converged on the spot. There, on the wet concrete, lay a single paper crane, soaked but perfectly folded, its wings slightly crushed. Luz picked it up with trembling fingers. "It's his," she breathed. "He made this one yesterday." The veteran pointed his flashlight at the church doors. "This means he came this way. He's seeking shelter." Chapter 15. The True Result. Chapter 15. The Truth in Paper Wings. The first rays of dawn filtered through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the empty church pews. Pastor Joe's keys jingled softly as he unlocked the heavy wooden doors, his shoulders heavy from a sleepless night of searching. He'd come to pray for Teo's safe return, hoping for guidance in the quiet morning hours. As he walked down the center aisle, a small sound caught his attention, the whisper of paper coming from above. Pastor Joe looked up toward the balcony, and his heart skipped a beat. There, curled up on one of the cushioned seats, was Teo. The boy was fast asleep, his small frame wrapped around what looked like an old shoebox. A slightly crushed paper crane rested in his hand. "Thank you, Lord," Pastor Joe breathed, pulling out his phone. His fingers trembled as he typed. "Found him. Safe. Church balcony." Within minutes, the church doors burst open. Luz ran in, her hair wild from the rain and lack of sleep, with Ethan close behind her. They both looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes. "Teo!" Luz called out, her voice breaking with relief. The boy stirred at his mother's voice, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Mommy?" Before anyone could move toward the stairs, the church doors opened again. Mina Park strode in, clutching a manila envelope, her normally neat appearance disheveled as if she'd been up all night too. "Wait," she called out, her voice echoing in the sacred space. "Before anything else happens, you all need to see this." Mina's hands shook as she pulled out several documents. "I've been digging since yesterday afternoon. The lab results? They were tampered with." She spread the papers on a nearby pew. "I have proof that Cecilia Rhodes bribed a lab technician to switch the samples." Ethan's face darkened. "What?" "Email exchanges, bank transfers. It's all here." Mina pointed to highlighted sections. "The tech confessed everything when I confronted him with the evidence. He's willing to testify." Pastor Joe moved closer, examining the documents. "This is serious criminal behavior." "There's more," Mina continued. "I've already contacted Judge Martinez. She's ordered an immediate new test with triple verification protocols. The results came in an hour ago." She pulled out another paper, handling it like it was made of gold. 99.9% match. "Ethan, you are Teo's father." The truth hung in the air like a physical presence. Luz covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan staggered slightly, gripping the back of a pew for support. Up in the balcony, Teo's small voice carried down. "I knew it!" He stood up, still holding the shoebox and his paper crane. "I found this in Mommy's special box last week." He pulled out a wrinkled envelope. "It's the fake letter that made Mommy sad." Luz gasped. "My keepsake box. I thought I'd lost it in the move." Teo carefully made his way down the stairs, one step at a time. "I hid up here 'cause I was scared the mean lady would make you go away again." He looked at Ethan. "Like what happened to Mommy before." Ethan crossed the space between them, in long strides, kneeling before his son. His voice was rough with emotion. "No one is going to make me go away, Teo. Not ever again." Luz joined them, her arms encircling them both. "We're here, mi amor. We're all here." Pastor Joe and Mina stepped back, giving the family space. The morning light grew stronger, streaming through the windows and illuminating the three figures holding each other in the church aisle. Teo wiggled slightly in their embrace, looking up at Ethan with those familiar dark eyes, his eyes. "So it's true?" "Yes, my Joe," Luz whispered, smoothing his hair. "It's true." Mina cleared her throat softly. "The press will need to be handled carefully. This kind of corporate corruption." "Later," Ethan interrupted, not taking his eyes off Teo. Everything else can wait. Pastor Joe nodded, guiding Mina toward his office. Let's give them some time. In the quiet church, Teo pulled away just enough to hold up his slightly crumpled paper crane. I made this one last night. It's special. He pressed it into Ethan's hand. It's a wish for family. Ethan stared at the delicate paper creation, then back at his son, seeing his own features reflected in the boy's face. How had he not recognized them before? The shape of the eyes, the determined set of the jaw, even the way Teo furrowed his brow in concentration. Luz reached out and touched the crane's wing. You folded it perfectly, mi amor. 1,000 cranes make wishes come true, Teo said seriously. That's what Ms. Ruby told me. I've been making them every day. How many do you have now? Ethan asked, his voice gentle. 312, Teo answered promptly. But maybe we don't need all 1,000 anymore? 'Cause this wish already came true? A fresh wave of tears spilled down Luz's cheeks, but she was smiling. Some wishes are stronger than others, Misiello. The morning sun continued to rise, painting the church in ever brighter colors. The paper crane in Ethan's hand caught the light, its shadows dancing across the floor, a delicate thing made strong by love and truth, just like the family holding each other in its glow. Chapter 16. Setting the Table Right. Chapter 16. Confession and Legacy. The church hall buzzed with tension as reporters packed the wooden pews, their cameras ready. Afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across faces both familiar and strange. Ms. Ruby stood guard at the door like a sentinel, while Pastor Joe positioned himself near the pulpit, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. Ethan Vale stepped up to the microphone, his suit crisp but his eyes tired. The past 48 hours had aged him visibly. Beside him, Luz sat with quiet dignity, her hand resting protectively on Teo's shoulder. The boy clutched a paper crane, his small fingers smoothing its wings over and over. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "I stand before you today, not as CEO of Vale Technologies, but as a man who has learned hard lessons about truth, family, and the cost of silence." Cameras clicked rapidly as he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Vale Technologies. This decision comes in light of recent events that have exposed serious ethical breaches within our corporate leadership." A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. Cecilia Rhodes, seated in the front row with Vale Tech's board members, shifted uncomfortably. "Last week, DNA test results were released, suggesting I was not the father of Theodore Morales. Those results were falsified." Ethan's voice grew stronger, edged with controlled anger. "Through the diligent work of investigative journalist Mina Park, we have uncovered evidence of tampering and corruption." Mina stood from her place near the wall, holding up a thick manila envelope. "I have here signed affidavits from laboratory personnel admitting to accepting bribes to alter test results. I also have documented proof of wire transfers linking directly to accounts controlled by Cecilia Rhodes." The church erupted in shocked murmurs. 2 police officers moved quietly into position near the exits. "Ms. Rhodes orchestrated a campaign of discrimination and deceit," Ethan continued. "Not just against Luz Morales and her son, but against the very community we promised to serve. She employed online trolls to spread racist rhetoric, fabricated stories to discredit honest people, and attempted to destroy a program that was bringing real change to people's lives." Cecilia shot to her feet, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. "This is ridiculous! You have no proof!" "Actually," Mina interrupted, stepping forward with another document, "we have your signature on the payment authorizations, and the lab technician is very willing to testify." The police officers moved in smoothly, approaching Cecilia. She looked around wildly, but found no allies among the board members who now sat stone-faced, distancing themselves from her disgrace. As Cecilia was escorted out, Ethan turned to face Luz and Teo directly. "To you both, and to this entire community, I offer my deepest apology. I should have protected you better. I should have seen through the lies sooner. I was so focused on building programs and foundations that I forgot the most important thing: standing up for the people I love." Teo looked up at his father, offering him the paper crane. Ethan took it gently, his hands trembling slightly. "There's one more truth that needs to be shared," he said, unfolding a yellowed envelope. "This letter was found in my father's private files. He wrote it shortly before his death, but never sent it." The room fell silent as Ethan began to read. "Dear Luz, by the time you read this, if you ever do, I will likely be gone. The doctors say I don't have long, and cowardice has kept me from facing you directly. I owe you an apology that no words can fully express. 10 years ago, I used my influence to have your scholarship revoked. I paid people to forge letters, to make my son believe you had left him, to make you believe he had abandoned you. I did this out of pride, prejudice, and a toxic belief that I knew what was best for the Vale legacy. I was wrong. In protecting what I thought was our family's future, I destroyed something precious and true. I separated two people who loved each other, and worse, I denied my own grandchild the chance to know his father. The success I chase now tastes like ashes. In my final days, I see clearly what matters. Not stock prices or board seats, but the simple grace of breaking bread together, of loving without conditions, of building tables large enough for all. To you, to my son, and to my grandson, whom I will never meet, I am sorry, Graham Vale." Ethan's voice cracked on the final words. He looked up, tears streaming openly down his face. "My father built walls. He taught me to do the same. But thanks to Luz, thanks to Teo, thanks to this community, I've learned a different way." He squared his shoulders, facing the assembled crowd with new determination. "From this day forward, I pledge to build bridges instead of walls. The Table for All Foundation will continue, stronger than ever, with complete autonomy and community oversight. We will create spaces where everyone belongs, where no one goes hungry, for food or for connection." Camera flashes caught the moment as Luz stood, taking Ethan's hand. Teo wrapped his arms around both their waists, and for a moment they stood together as a family, bathed in the multicolored light from the church windows above. The end. Chapter 17. Homecoming Meal. Chapter 16. Setting the Table Right, Scene 2. Evening light and paper wings. The scent of fresh-baked casseroles filled Luz's small apartment, mixing with the familiar aromas of home that had first drawn Ethan in during that stormy night. Neighbors had been dropping by all evening, each carrying a dish and words of support. Mrs. B1.com, Chen from across the hall brought her famous rice casserole, while the Rodriguez family from upstairs delivered still warm enchiladas. Every container came wrapped in care and vindication. Luz moved around her tiny kitchen with practiced grace, arranging the offerings on her counter. The space felt different now, not smaller, but fuller, warmed by more than just the heat of cooking. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes held a peace that had been missing in recent days. Ethan sat at the familiar wooden table, the same one where he'd first tasted her chicken and dumplings. He'd shed his usual business attire for a casual sweater and jeans, looking more at home than he ever had in his sterile penthouse. His fingers traced the familiar scratches in the wood, each mark now a story he knew by heart. Teo bounced between helping his mother and settling into his chair, his energy barely contained. A stack of colored paper squares sat beside his plate, waiting to be transformed into delicate birds. His backpack, recovered from the church, hung on its usual hook by the door, a reminder of fears overcome. "Remember how scared you looked that first night?" Luz asked, setting down a warm plate in front of Ethan. "Standing there in your expensive suit, dripping wet," Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I probably looked like a lost puppy. I felt like one." "You looked important," Teo piped up, carefully selecting a sheet of blue paper. "But sad. Really sad." "I was," Ethan admitted, watching his son's fingers begin the familiar folds. "I didn't even know how sad until your mom put that first plate in front of me." Luz settled into her chair, her knee brushing against Ethan's under the table. "I almost didn't invite you in. But something in your eyes." She paused, reaching for the serving spoon. "You looked hungry for more than just food." "I was starving," Ethan said softly. "Not just for a meal, but for this." He gestured to the table, to the three of them sitting together. "For family. For real connection. I just didn't know it yet." Teo looked up from his folding. "Is that why you cried? When you ate Mommy's dumplings?" "Exactly why," Ethan nodded, accepting the bowl Luz passed him. "Your mom's cooking reminded me what home felt like. Something I'd forgotten a long time ago." They filled their plates, passing dishes back and forth in a comfortable rhythm. The casseroles steamed, their aromas mixing with memories. Through the window, the sky darkened to purple, and Luz lit the same candles she'd used during the power outage. "You saved me that night," Ethan said, looking at Luz over the flickering flames. "Both of you did. I was so locked up in my tower, surrounded by everything money could buy, but completely alone." "We weren't trying to save anyone," Luz replied, her voice gentle. "We were just sharing what little we had." "That's exactly what saved me," Ethan said. "The simple act of sharing, of being seen as just a person, not a headline or a bank account." Teo's fingers moved steadily, creasing and folding with practiced precision. "Mom always says sharing makes the food taste better." "Your mom is very wise," Ethan smiled, taking another bite of Mrs. Chen's casserole. "And she was right about so many things." They ate together, sharing stories between bites. Luz recalled how nervous she'd been cooking for the company cafeteria that first day. Ethan described the board's faces when he announced the foundation. Teo told them about hiding in the church, how the paper cranes had kept him company until Pastor Joe found him. The candles burned lower, casting warm shadows across their faces. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. Nothing like the storm that had first brought them together, but enough to make the apartment feel even cozier. "I never thought I'd have this," Ethan admitted, helping Luz clear some plates. "A real family. A place where I truly belong." "You always belonged here," Teo said matter-of-factly, putting the finishing touches on his crane. "You just didn't know it yet." Luz reached across the table, squeezing Ethan's hand. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves, one meal at a time." Teo held up his completed crane, its wings perfectly balanced, made from shimmering blue paper that caught the candlelight. With careful movements, he placed it next to Ethan's plate, turning it until it faced just right. "This one's for Dad," he said simply, his eyes bright with love and certainty. Chapter 18. Foundation launched. Chapter 17. Homecoming meal. Scene 2. The morning sun streamed through the church's newly expanded kitchen windows, catching the steam rising from bubbling pots. Headlines across tablet screens and newspapers proclaimed, "Table for All Foundation opens 50th Community Kitchen." The achievement felt surreal to everyone who remembered that first stormy night when a lonely billionaire had tasted real kindness in a humble apartment. Ms. Ruby stood at her usual post, clipboard in hand, barking orders with a smile that couldn't quite hide her pride. "Tommy, those onions aren't going to dice themselves." And Sarah, "Honey, mind that sauce? We're feeding people, not making cement." The kitchen bustled with activity. 3 teenagers huddled around Jack, a retired Navy cook, learning the proper way to julienne vegetables. His weathered hands guided theirs with patient precision. "Like this, see? Nice and even strips. Presentation matters as much as taste." Luz moved through the organized chaos like a conductor, her dark hair swept back in a neat bun. She paused to taste broths, adjust seasonings, and offer encouragement. The professional chef's coat she wore bore the Table for All logo, a simple wooden table with chairs of different styles gathered around it. The sight still made her throat tight sometimes, remembering how far they'd come. "Chef Morales," called out Maria, a high school junior who'd been part of the program since day one. "Is this the right consistency for the roux?" Luz dipped a spoon into the mixture and nodded approvingly. "Perfect. You're getting better every day." The girl beamed under the praise. Ethan entered through the back door, carrying boxes of fresh produce from local farmers, another partnership the foundation had fostered. He'd long since learned to navigate the kitchen without disrupting the flow, though Ms. Ruby still gave him the eye when he came near her station. "Mind those tomatoes, Mr. Vale," she warned. "I've got plans for those beauties." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with a grin, carefully setting down his load. The former CEO had grown comfortable in this world of practical work and genuine connections. His designer suits had given way to simple button-downs and khakis, often spotted with flour or sauce by day's end. Across the room, Derek, another veteran volunteer, supervised a group of teens packaging meals for homebound seniors. Remember, folks, these containers are someone's highlight of the day. Pack them with care. The preparation area had expanded significantly since the program's inception. Modern equipment lined the walls, but they'd kept the old wooden prep table where it all started, now marked with countless knife scores and stains, each one a story of community and healing. "Looking good in here," Ethan said, sliding an arm around Luz's waist as she reviewed the day's menu board. She leaned into him briefly before straightening. 50 kitchens, can you believe it? Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still going to be cleaning offices. "You were always meant for more than that," he murmured. "We all were," she replied, watching a shy freshman learn to crack eggs one-handed under Ms. Ruby's watchful eye. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of chopping, stirring, and teaching. Veterans shared stories while demonstrating techniques. Teenagers who'd once been glued to their phones now engaged in real conversation, proud of their growing skills. The kitchen had become more than a place to cook. It was a classroom, a community center, and a refuge. Near noon, a small crowd gathered outside for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony of their latest kitchen expansion. News cameras rolled as Luz stepped up to the microphone, Ethan beside her. "A year ago, this was just a dream," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Today, we're not just feeding people, we're building bridges, teaching skills, and showing what's possible when we make room for everyone at the table." The applause was warm and genuine. Ms. Ruby dabbed at her eyes with her apron, though she'd deny it later if anyone mentioned it. Ethan took his turn speaking, his hand finding Luz's. "This program works because it's built on authenticity and dignity. Every person who comes through these doors has value to add, stories to share, and skills to learn or teach." As they reached for the ceremonial scissors together, Ethan pressed a gentle kiss to Luz's temple. The cameras flashed, capturing not just a moment of success, but the simple truth of two people who had found their way home through an open door and a warm meal. The red ribbon fluttered in the morning breeze, waiting to be cut, a symbol of new beginnings, second chances, and tables with room for all. Chapter 19. Thanksgiving Lights. Chapter 18. Foundation Launched. Scene 2. Golden afternoon light filtered through the autumn leaves as volunteers strung twinkling lights between the old oak trees behind the church. The air carried the mingled aromas of roasting turkey, fresh-baked pies, and Ms. Ruby's famous cornbread dressing. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, casting warm circles of light across the long tables arranged in neat rows on the lawn. Luz stood at the kitchen door, taking in the scene with misty eyes. She watched Teo darting between tables, carefully arranging paper cranes next to each place setting. His small hands smoothed each cloth napkin with determined precision, just as she'd taught him. The sight made her heart swell. "Everything okay?" Ethan's gentle voice came from behind her. He carried a stack of pies that filled the air with cinnamon and nutmeg. "More than okay," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "Just remembering that first night. Who would have thought a power outage could lead to all this?" Ms. Ruby's voice boomed across the yard. "Less remembering, more moving. These folks aren't going to feed themselves." But her stern expression melted into a smile as she directed a group of teenagers setting up the buffet tables. Veterans in pressed uniforms helped elderly neighbors find seats, while young corporate interns chatted with recent immigrants, exchanging stories about family recipes. Pastor Joe moved through the crowd, greeting everyone by name, his laugh carrying across the gathering. Teo ran up to Ethan, tugging at his sleeve. "Dad, we need more chairs! Mr. Rodriguez brought his whole family." "On it, buddy." Ethan ruffled Teo's hair and headed for the storage room, looking more at home in his casual sweater than he ever had in his executive suits. Inside the kitchen, organized chaos reigned. Mina, who'd traded her reporter's notebook for an apron, stirred enormous pots of gravy. Jack, the veteran who now ran the Foundation's cooking program, supervised a team of eager students preparing last-minute dishes. "Careful with those rolls," Luz called out as two young boys rushed past with steaming baskets. "They're hot!" The dinner bell rang, and conversations hushed momentarily before swelling again with excitement. People began finding their seats, the mix of languages and laughter creating a symphony of community. Ethan emerged from the kitchen balancing 3 pies. A year ago, such a domestic task would have seemed impossible for the isolated CEO. Now he moved with easy grace, stopping to serve slices and chat with guests. "These aren't as good as yours," he told Mrs. Chen, an elderly neighbor who regularly brought desserts to their weekly dinners. "But I'm learning." "Practice makes perfect," she replied with a wink. "Next week, I teach you proper mooncake." Teo finished his table-setting duties and climbed onto a chair next to his best friend Miguel, their heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers. Paper cranes perched between water glasses like silent guardians of joy. As the sun began to set, the string lights twinkled to life, creating a canopy of stars above the gathering. Luz stepped to the center of the crowd, and a respectful hush fell. "Before we begin," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I'd like to thank everyone who made this possible, not just today's meal, but everything the foundation represents." She looked at Ethan, who stood nearby with pride shining in his eyes. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come from unexpected storms." Members of the crowd nodded, many remembering the viral photo that had started it all, a lonely billionaire crying over chicken and dumplings in a humble apartment. "We're here today," Luz continued, "because we believe that everyone deserves a place at the table, not just for food, but for fellowship, for family, for love." She gestured to the diverse faces around her. "Look at who we are together. Corporate executives and church volunteers, veterans and students, grandparents and children, all equal, all welcome." Pastor Joe stepped forward, his weathered Bible in hand. "Shall we join hands for grace?" The crowd rose, fingers intertwined across the tables. Manicured hands clasping work-roughened ones. Small children's hands held by arthritis-bent fingers. Pale hands linked with dark ones. The first notes of "Amazing Grace" rose softly from somewhere in the gathering. Teo reached for Ethan's hand on one side and Luz's on the other, his paper crane tucked safely in his pocket. As voices joined the hymn, the string lights sparkled above like stars, blessing the feast below. Chapter 20. The Feast of Grace. Golden afternoon light filtered through the autumn leaves as volunteers strung twinkling lights between the old oak trees behind the church. The air carried the mingled aromas of roasting turkey, fresh-baked pies, and Ms. Ruby's famous cornbread dressing. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, casting warm circles of light across the long tables arranged in neat rows on the lawn. Ethan stood at the head of the main table, carving knife poised over a golden-brown turkey. His sleeves were rolled up, and his tie had long since been loosened. Despite the chill in the air, warmth radiated from the gathering of people around him. To his left, Luz ladled her signature stew into bowls, steam rising in delicate wisps that caught the glow of the string lights overhead. "More turkey, Mr. Thompson?" Ethan asked the elderly veteran who had once been skeptical of the whole Table for All program. Now Thompson was a regular volunteer, teaching younger vets how to cook the meals their grandmothers used to make. "Don't mind if I do, son," Thompson replied with a grin. "Never thought I'd see the day when a CEO would be serving me dinner." "Former CEO," Ethan corrected with a smile, adding an extra slice to Thompson's plate. "And I think we both know I got the better end of that deal." Nearby, Ms. Ruby directed traffic like a 4-star general, making sure everyone had a place to sit. "Maria, honey, come sit by Mr. Master www. Chenry he was just telling me about his daughter's wedding. And Jimmy, scoot over and make room for Mrs. Patterson." The tables filled quickly with an unlikely mix of people. Corporate executives sitting beside church volunteers, recent immigrants sharing bread with lifelong residents, and children of all backgrounds darting between the chairs in an impromptu game of tag. Teo zoomed past, nearly colliding with a volunteer carrying a stack of plates. "Sorry," he called over his shoulder, then disappeared into a crowd of laughing kids. "Careful, mijo," Luz called after him, but she was smiling. She turned to serve another bowl of stew to Sarah, one of Ethan's former board members who had supported him during the crisis. "Would you like some extra cornbread with that, please?" Sarah said warmly. "I still can't believe how different everything feels now. Remember last year's corporate Thanksgiving? All those fancy appetizers and nobody really talking to each other?" Luz nodded, adding a generous piece of cornbread to Sarah's plate. "Sometimes, the simplest food brings people together the best." At the far end of the table, Pastor Joe was deep in conversation with a group of veterans about expanding the cooking program. "The kids really respond to structure," one vet was saying, "and there's something about learning to feed others that helps heal the soul." A young mother, who had recently arrived from Venezuela, was teaching her table mates the proper way to fold empanadas, while her children taught Teo new words in Spanish. The boy who had once spent hours alone folding paper cranes now had more friends than he could count. Ethan paused in his carving to take in the scene. The string lights twinkled overhead like stars, casting a gentle glow over the faces of his newfound family, not just Luz and Teo, but this entire community that had somehow become home. He thought about his old penthouse apartment with its stark walls and empty rooms, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. A small commotion drew his attention to where Mr. Thompson and Mr. Chen were discovering they had served in the same area during the war, albeit on different sides. There was a moment of tension until Mr. Chen pulled out his phone to show pictures of his grandchildren, and soon they were swapping stories like old friends. "More turkey, Mr. Vale?" came a familiar voice, and Ethan turned to find Ms. Ruby holding out a plate. "You've been so busy serving everyone else, you haven't eaten a bite." "Thank you, Miss Ruby," he said softly, accepting the plate. "And thank you for, well, everything." She patted his cheek with a weathered hand. "You did good, child. Now go sit down and enjoy your family." Ethan found his place beside Luz, who was finally taking a break from serving. Teo had returned from his games and was demonstrating his newest origami creation to a fascinated audience of both children and adults. The conversations around them flowed like a gentle stream, business talk mixing with church gossip, cooking tips shared across cultural divides, and the endless, excited chatter of children. Someone started singing an old hymn, and others joined in, voices rising sweet and clear into the evening air. Ethan felt Luz's hand find his under the table, her fingers intertwining with his own. He turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had first opened her door to him on a stormy night, and ended up opening his heart to a whole new world. The twinkling lights reflected in her eyes as she squeezed his hand gently. Ethan felt tears welling up, but for once, he didn't try to hide them. Here, surrounded by the warmth of true community and real love, he finally understood what it meant to be home. Chapter 21. Cranes for All. Chapter 20. The Feast of Grace. Scene 1. Continued. Teo weaved between the tables with practiced care, his small hands distributing delicate paper cranes. Each one was perfectly folded, some made from bright construction paper, others from pages of old magazines. His dark eyes sparkled with purpose as he placed them beside each plate, pausing to straighten any that wobbled. "This one's special," he told Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who volunteered at the church kitchen. He set a shimmering blue crane next to her water glass. "I made it from the paper Miss Ruby gave me. See how it sparkles?" Mrs. Rodriguez touched the crane gently with weathered fingers. "It's beautiful, mi amor." At the veterans' table, Teo carefully positioned red, white, and blue cranes. "These are for bravery," he explained to Mr. Jackson, who had helped search for him that rainy night. The old soldier's eyes misted as he picked up his crane, turning it to catch the light. Pastor Joe watched from his seat, smiling as Teo approached a group of newly arrived immigrant families. Though they spoke little English, the boy's gesture needed no translation. Their children reached for the colorful birds with delighted gasps, and their parents nodded gratefully. "What are all these for, sweetheart?" asked a young intern from Ethan's company, admiring the yellow crane Teo had just placed before her. Teo stood straighter, his voice clear and confident. "Each crane is a wish for kindness," he announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "My teacher says when you fold 1,000 cranes you get a wish, but I thought," he glanced at Luz, who nodded encouragingly, "maybe if we share them the wishes work better." Mina Park sat at a corner table, her notebook open but forgotten as she watched the scene unfold. Her camera captured Teo's earnest expression as he continued his mission, the way people's faces softened when he explained the meaning behind his gifts. Her fingers moved across her laptop keyboard, the headline already forming, "A table big enough for all." "Some people think kindness is just being nice," Teo continued, reaching the table where Miss Ruby sat with her church friends. "But Mommy says it's bigger than that. It's like making room at your table even when you think it's full." He placed a purple crane beside Miss Ruby's plate, and she pulled him into a quick, fierce hug. The boy made his way through the gathering, his backpack gradually emptying of its paper treasures. Each crane found its perfect recipient. A rainbow-colored one for the shy teenager who'd recently come out to his accepting church family, a golden one for the cafeteria worker who always snuck extra cookies to hungry kids, a pure white one for the widow who'd lost her husband last spring. When Teo reached his parents' place at the head table, he hesitated. From his backpack, he withdrew 2 final cranes. The first, made from a page of sheet music, he presented to Luz. "Because you sing when you cook," he explained, making her laugh even as tears threatened. The last crane was crafted from what looked like a business document, one of Ethan's company memos, carefully transformed. Teo held it out to his father with both hands, suddenly shy. "This one's special too," he whispered, "because you learned how to fold them with me." Ethan knelt down to his son's level, accepting the crane with the same reverence he'd once reserved for million-dollar contracts. His fingers traced the precise creases, remembering hours spent practicing with Teo, paper scattered across Luz's kitchen table while she cooked dinner. With deliberate care, Ethan tucked the crane into his suit pocket, positioning it just over his heart. The paper settled there like it had always belonged, a reminder of everything that mattered more than boardrooms and bottom lines. Around them, the feast continued. Veterans shared stories with wide-eyed teenagers. Children darted between tables, playing an elaborate game of tag. Ms. Ruby's laughter boomed across the lawn as she teased Pastor Joe about his 3rd helping of turkey. Paper cranes caught the late afternoon light, casting tiny shadows that danced across white tablecloths. Mina watched Ethan adjusting his crane, making sure it sat perfectly in his pocket. Her article would capture this moment. Not just the food or the gathering, but the simple truth of a boy's paper cranes bringing people together, one wish for kindness at a time. Chapter 22, Porch Light Again. Chapter 21, Cranes for All. Scene 2. The night air held a gentle warmth as Ethan, Luz, and Teo walked home from the church celebration. Street lamps cast pools of golden light on the sidewalk, and the stars peeked through breaks in the passing clouds. Teo skipped ahead, clutching his backpack full of leftover paper cranes, occasionally turning to walk backward so he could keep talking to them. "Did you see how many people wanted cranes?" Teo beamed, his sneakers scuffing against the concrete. "Miss Ruby said we should make them every week." "That's because you make the best ones, my Joe," Luz said, her hand brushing against Ethan's as they walked. She wore a simple dress that caught the streetlight, and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. Ethan couldn't stop stealing glances at her. The evening had been perfect, the community gathered, sharing food and stories, everyone connected by Teo's paper birds. But his heart thundered with something bigger than the success of their foundation or the healing of old wounds. "Can I try making them too?" Ethan asked Teo. "You could teach me." Teo's face lit up. "Really? But you have to promise to practice. The first ones always come out funny-looking." "I promise," Ethan said solemnly, making Luz laugh. They reached the apartment building, its brick facade warm and familiar now. The porch light cast a soft glow over the steps where everything had changed that stormy night. Teo bounded up, already fishing his house key from his pocket. "I'm going to sort my cranes by color," he announced, disappearing inside, with the energy only a child could have after such a long day. Luz moved to follow, but Ethan caught her hand gently. "Wait, just for a minute?" She turned back, and the porch light caught the questions in her eyes. Ethan's throat felt tight. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, But now the carefully planned words scattered like autumn leaves. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped. His fingers trembled slightly against hers. "That first night, when the storm brought me here, I thought I was lost. But I wasn't lost at all. I was finally finding my way home." Luz's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. The distant sound of traffic mingled with cricket song, and somewhere a wind chime tinkled softly. "Being Teo's father," Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible. But Luz, these past months with both of you, I don't want to be just Teo's father anymore." He took both her hands in his, drawing her closer on the worn steps. "I want to belong to both of you, to be part of this family we're building, not because of duty or DNA or even because of that stormy night, but because I love you, Luz Morales. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you see people really see them. I love watching you teach Teo to be brave and generous. I even love how you still won't let me help with the dishes." A tear slipped down Luz's cheek, catching the light. "You already do help with the dishes. You just do them wrong on purpose, so I'll laugh." "Guilty," Ethan admitted with a shaky smile. "But I'd spend the rest of my life doing dishes wrong if it means I get to stay. If you want me to stay." Luz reached up and touched his face, her fingers warm against his skin. "The night you came to my door, I was so scared to let you in. Not because you were Ethan Vale, the billionaire, but because you were Ethan, the boy I never stopped loving, even after all these years." His heart soared at her words. She continued, her voice soft but sure. "And now you're Ethan, the man who kneels down to look my son in the eye when he talks, who brings groceries to Miss Ruby's seniors without telling anyone, who gave up everything to protect us." "I didn't give up anything," Ethan whispered. "I gained everything." Luz's tears fell freely now, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes to belonging. Yes to family. Yes to doing dishes wrong forever." Ethan pulled her close, his own eyes wet. She fit perfectly in his arms, like she'd always been meant to be there. The porch light glowed steadily above them, a beacon of home and hope and new beginnings. Through the window, they could hear Teo humming as he arranged his paper cranes. But for this moment, they just held each other, their hearts beating in time, while the evening wrapped around them like a gentle blessing. Chapter 23. A Father's First Story. Chapter 22. Porch Light Again. Scene 2. Teo's bedroom glowed softly under his star-shaped nightlight, casting gentle shadows on walls covered with his origami creations. He sat cross-legged on his bed, already in his rocket ship pajamas, while Ethan perched uncertainly on the edge of the mattress. Luz leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them both with quiet affection. "Can you tell me a story?" Teo asked, hugging his favorite pillow. "Mom always tells the best ones, but I want to hear one from you tonight." Ethan tugged at his loosened tie, his usual confidence wavering. I'm not sure I know many good stories." "Just make one up," Teo encouraged, scooting closer. "That's what Mom does sometimes." Luz's soft chuckle from the doorway gave Ethan courage. He took a deep breath and settled more comfortably on the bed. "Okay," he began, his voice growing steadier. "Once upon a time, there was a king who lived in a very tall glass castle." "Like your building?" Teo interrupted, eyes bright with recognition. "Something like that," Ethan smiled. But even though his castle reached up into the clouds and had everything money could buy, the king was very lonely. He ate dinner by himself every night, and the only sounds in his castle were the clicking of computers and the whoosh of elevator doors. "That's sad," Teo whispered, clutching his pillow tighter. "It was sad," Ethan agreed, catching Luz's eye. "But one night there was a terrible storm. Thunder shook the castle's windows and lightning turned the sky purple. Then, suddenly all the lights went out." Teo gasped dramatically, fully invested in the tale. The king didn't know what to do in the dark castle. He'd never had to find his way without electricity before. So he walked down the stairs, until he found himself in a part of the castle he'd never visited. "The service floor," Teo whispered knowingly, making both adults smile. "And there, Ethan continued, his voice softening. He met a beautiful queen and her brave young prince. The queen was carrying bags full of magical food that could warm even the coldest heart. From the doorway, Luz pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. The queen invited the lonely king to share their meal, even though she had every reason not to trust him. And when he tasted her cooking, Ethan's voice caught slightly. He remembered what it felt like to be part of a family. "Did the prince show him how to fold paper cranes?" Teo asked eagerly. "He did," Ethan nodded. "The prince was very wise, you see. He knew that every crane carried a wish for happiness, and the lonely king needed those wishes more than anyone." "Just like you needed them," Teo observed simply. Ethan swallowed hard before continuing. The king started visiting the queen and prince every day. He learned that his big, empty castle wasn't really a home at all. Home was wherever the three of them were together, sharing meals and folding cranes and learning to be a family. Even when mean people tried to keep them apart? Teo's question was quiet but direct. "Even then," Ethan assured him, "because love is stronger than meanness. And the truth always finds its way into the light, just like the prince's cranes always found their way home." "Did they live happily ever after?" Teo yawned, eyelids growing heavy. "They're still working on that part," Ethan answered honestly. "But they have something better than a happily ever after. They have a real family, with real love, and that's worth more than all the glass castles in the world." Teo's eyes drifted closed, but he smiled sleepily. "I like that story," he murmured. "Can you tell it again tomorrow?" "Any time you want," Ethan promised, carefully pulling the blanket up to Teo's chin. He sat there for a moment, watching his son's peaceful face, still amazed that he had the right to call him that. When he finally stood and turned, Luz was watching him with tears in her eyes. She reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "Welcome home," she whispered. Chapter 24. Grace served hot. Chapter 24. Home. Cooked forever. Steam rose from bubbling pots in the church kitchen as laughter and chatter filled the air. The community dinner was in full swing, with neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder at long tables decorated with Teo's paper cranes. Children darted between chairs playing tag, while parents called after them to be careful. Ms. Ruby stood guard over her famous cornbread, wielding her wooden spoon like a scepter. "Now don't you even think about sneaking a piece before Grace," she warned a grinning teenager. "I've got eyes in the back of my head." At the serving station, Luz stirred her chicken and dumpling stew, the very same recipe from that stormy night weeks ago. The rich aroma of herbs and love filled the air, making stomachs growl and mouths water. She wore a crisp white apron with "Table for All" embroidered across the front, her dark hair pulled back neatly as she tasted the broth one final time. "Perfect," she murmured, adding just a pinch more pepper. Veterans from the neighborhood training program helped younger volunteers carry steaming platters to the tables. Pastor Joe moved among the crowd, stopping to lay a gentle hand on shoulders and share quiet words of encouragement. The whole room hummed with warmth and belonging. Ethan stood near the kitchen entrance, taking in the scene. Gone was his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple button-down with rolled-up sleeves, looking more relaxed than he had in years. His eyes followed Teo, who was carefully arranging paper cranes as centerpieces, tongue stuck out in concentration. "Earth to Ethan," Luz called, waving her ladle. "Come taste this before we serve." He made his way to her side, dodging running children and accepting friendly pats on the back from neighbors who now treated him like family rather than a visiting dignitary. The transformation still amazed him, how quickly walls could crumble when replaced by shared meals and genuine care. Luz held out a spoonful of stew, blowing on it gently. "Tell me if it needs anything." Ethan leaned forward to taste it, and the flavor instantly transported him back to that first night. Thunder crashing outside, rain lashing the windows, and this same warm comfort spreading through his chest. But this time, the tears that sprang to his eyes weren't born of lonely recognition. They came from overwhelming gratitude for everything that had grown from that simple meal. He blinked rapidly, but Luz had already noticed. She set down her ladle and touched his arm. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" "More than okay," he managed, voice rough with emotion. never imagined having all this. Around them, the kitchen bustled with activity. Ms. Ruby could be heard scolding someone about proper hand-washing technique. A timer dinged, and the smell of fresh rolls wafted through the air. Someone's grandmother was teaching teenagers how to properly fold napkins, while Pastor Joe's deep laugh boomed from the dining room. Teo appeared suddenly between them, tugging at Ethan's shirt. "Dad, come see! I made a special crane for our table." The word "Dad" still sent a thrill through Ethan's heart every time he heard it. He let his son lead him to their spots, where a delicate blue crane stood proudly next to their plates. "This one means family," Teo explained seriously. They settled into their seats as Miss Ruby rang the dinner bell. The crowd gradually found their places, a beautiful patchwork of ages and backgrounds all drawn together by food and fellowship. Pastor Joe stood to say grace, and heads bowed all around the room. Ethan felt Luz's hand slip into his under the table. On his other side, Teo's smaller fingers wrapped around his wrist. Connected to them both, he closed his eyes and let gratitude wash over him. When the prayer ended, Luz ladled generous portions of stew into their bowls. Steam curled upward in the warm light of the dining room, carrying the scent of home. Ethan lifted his spoon, looking first at Teo, who was already diving into his meal with gusto, then at Luz, who watched him with knowing eyes. "Home, cooked forever," he said softly, meaning so much more than just the food. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Luz Morales, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.